Hello, everyone. I'm Fozzie or Cam, and I'm here as always with my co-host Will. How are you doing today, Will?
I'm doing great, Cam. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic, and we've got someone on the podcast who we've kind of been asking if they'd apologize to us just based off their behavior in previous episodes. We weren't sure if we were gonna have them on, blah blah blah. It's been a whole debacle, really. But back with us, we have
No,
Mike.
Cam, it's me. It's me, Mike.
Yeah. That I was talking about you. Yeah, we've had some issues obviously with you in the past. So just
I just
before
want
we
to
get
say
oh,
I have no issues with you, Cam, or you, Will.
that's good to
I think you
hear.
guys
Really.
are amazing.
It's great to hear. So, just before we talk about the Jaylen Brown trade, where LeBron's going to end up, and Kawhi Leonard going to the Raptors to recreate potentially the 2019 Raptors team, um, with Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan both being free agents, which is actually kind of fun. But before we dive into all of that, can we just get an apology?
Yes, can we?
I like from you,
Oh, yeah.
preferably.
What am I apologizing for?
Just for a poor
You know
behavior.
what? I apologize for everything.
Okay.
Does that everything include, once again, saying that you're the third host of the podcast when you're not, which is why you have been gone once again for such an extended period of time? Are
Ha
you
haven't
are you
haven't we
apologizing for that specifically?
haven't we covered this information in the past? Isn't it just time to move on? I think I've already come on and taken care of business around all these things.
Uh, I, you know, I wish, well, I wish we could spend an entire episode just getting furious at the fact that he's drinking out of an Everything Podcast mug.
Yeah.
The fact that he's acting like he's done nothing wrong, blah blah blah. He's apologized, whatever. But we
Well, there's been a
can't.
lot of topics you guys talked about when I wasn't available to be on the pod. In some circles that I live in, that's called about talking behind people's back or not being, brave enough to say it to their face. But you know what? I'm going to honor both of your integrity so much that I'm just moving past all that. And I'm just ready to hit the reset button, the start of a brand new day.
Let me
You know
just say
what?
this quickly,
Okay.
Cam. I am just amazed that every single time this man, Mike Coughlin, every single time he comes on this podcast, he just reinforces why he is not on that often. It is unbelievable. Every opportunity that this guy has to come on and reprimand his poor behavior, he just reinforces why he is not on nearly as much as he should be.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with Will here. There's just every time we try to extend um, some sort of peace offering out there, it gets swatted back in our faces with
No, I'm
disrespect.
taking the peace. I feel the peace in
Okay.
my heart, and I have peace and love for both of you.
All right. So, but I'm gonna take what you just said, reset button. We're gonna hit the reset button, and we're gonna go from there. And where we're gonna go? We got to talk about Jaylen Brown because I feel like we all have um, different takes on this issue. And, you know, first and foremost, everyone I've talked to kind of had a stage of grief process to it. It all started, that midday ESPN notification. Jaylen Brown is traded for Paul George. And when that's all you see, you start to really you start to really lose your mind. You kind of get a little upset. You're shocked, obviously, because in what world would anyone want to lose their all-star player, their MVP finalist, their all-star player who hasn't even hit their ceiling yet, as a player, who's just entering the prime of his career? Who would want to lose that? And who would want to lose that in exchange for Paul George, who hasn't been that good in years? Podcast Paul George has not been, that dominant all-star that he was
He
for
did stop his podcast, by the way,
oh, he did?
to focus on his mental health.
Okay, that's good to hear. And I respect him for that. That being said, it doesn't change the fact that he still isn't playing like he did in the past. So obviously, initially seeing that Jaylen Brown is traded for Paul George is shocking. But I mean, when you look further into it, and Brad Stevens recently just did a press conference, you get more information from Brad, um, where he says that his reason for trading Jaylen Brown is he needs flexibility for the franchise going down in the future, which I mean does make sense. Jaylen Brown in 2023 signed a massive contract, and obviously that doesn't leave a lot of flexibility to acquire new players and such, to build your team to be better and go further in the season. So from that perspective, I understand where Brad's coming from. I want my team to be good in the future as much as the next person. So if Brad truly thinks this is going to be what benefits our team in the most in the future, then I respect that for sure. But I find myself having a difficult time sort of seeing how are we going to be a better team next season? I just don't think it's possible. I think we went from a 2 seed team to maybe a 4 or 5. And that being said, I don't think we're going to be that much worse. I just don't think it's possible for us to be a better team. And I know the analytics may possibly suggest otherwise, but I don't know how Paul George is going to impact those analytics. We don't know how much he's going to be demanding the ball. We don't know how well he's going to be playing. And we also don't we just don't know how this team's gonna function without Jaylen Brown. They haven't functioned without him in, I mean, a while since 2017, I believe. So it's gonna be interesting for sure. I'd be surprised if we are a better team this upcoming season. And there are a lot of good things that were a lot of good changes that were made to this team in the offseason already that I'll address after we all kind of give our reactions to this trade. But that still being said, I don't see us being better next season. Will, I know you sort of feel similar to me on this. What's your take on the JB trade?
Yeah, so I would say when I initially heard the news, just initially heard the news with no background information, no having read further into it, I was just like, this is ridiculous. Trading Jaylen Brown for injury prone Paul George is just ridiculous and absurd and can't be defended. That was my initial reaction when I just saw the news for the first time
Yeah.
with like no background information whatsoever. But here's my take after sitting on it for a bit, gathering more information, and kind of having time to dig deeper into this. Starting just straight up with Jaylen Brown for Paul George, that I do not think is a good look because you're trading Jaylen Brown, who's just coming off of the best season of his career, for Paul George, who, even though he played well in that playoff series against the Celtics, is an injury prone player. And anytime you're trading somebody like Jaylen Brown for an injury prone Paul George, it just doesn't look good. So that I don't think is a good look for the Celtics. But this is why I actually think, and this is a big if, because we're obviously going to have to see it happen. And, one concern that I have is that Jason Tatum, because the Celtics are making a statement, Jason Tatum is our guy. He's the future of our franchise. What I'm afraid of is since Jason Tatum is coming off of an injury, I'm worried that he could become an injury-prone player for the rest of his career and make the Celtics look foolish in hindsight for deciding to have him be the future of their franchise coming off of such a massive injury instead of Jaylen Brown, who's proved more durable. So that is something that I am concerned about for the Celtics down the line. But I also think that this trade could prove incredibly beneficial for the Celtics from the standpoint of you can't deny that having two players in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum on your team who both deserve to make a ton of money, that can drag your team down. We saw it with the Warriors during the peak of their dynasty. And look, to the Warriors' credit, they won championships in 2017 and 2018 when they had Steph and Clay and Draymond and KD. But the rest of their roster, I remember this especially being the case in the 2017-2018 season. The rest of their roster really was not that great. Now, to the Warriors' credit, they won championships those 2 seasons, but their bench was not the strongest. And I feel like if you're the Celtics, I feel like if they had kept both Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, then that could have provided situations where a player like a Peyton Pritchard, who has proved so valuable to the Celtics, is going to require a bigger payday, but the Celtics are not going to be able to provide him that bigger payday because of the money that they would be paying to both Brown and Tatum. So I think moving off of Jaylen Brown and not having to worry about 2 big contracts in Brown and Tatum opens up space for them to have a much better roster around Jason Tatum and a much better bench around Jason Tatum than if they had kept both Brown and Tatum on the team. And another thing I thought of is, even though the Celtics did end up blowing a 3-1 lead in embarrassing fashion to the Philadelphia 76ers in the first round, the Celtics have proven that they can be a great regular season team without both Brown and Tatum being there, because last season Tatum was out for the majority of the regular season and Jaylen Brown stepped up, and Derek White and Peyton Pritchard kind of both played the number 2 scoring option beautifully, and the Celtics were the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. So I'm wondering if the Celtics might be thinking that Derek White and Peyton Pritchard in particular, have the ability to really rise up and be number 2 scoring options. And I wonder if they're just like, we've already proven that we can have a successful regular season with just one of Brown and Tatum and not both of them. So I wonder if they're just like, we'll have Tatum next season. Derek White and Peyton Pritchard have proven that they can be that number 2 scoring option. And I wonder if they're just like, we're going to be good with that. And if we can get Paul George, that's an added bonus. But if we don't have him, then we're still going to have enough. So, I mean, time will tell on whether this turns out to be good for the Celtics or not. As I said, I do worry for Boston that Tatum could become injury prone, and that could make them choosing Tatum instead of Brown as the face of their franchise really bad. But for the other reasons I just I just talked about, I actually think this trade could end up looking really good for the Celtics in hindsight. And Mike, I want to turn this over to you because I want to let you talk about this because you were the one who found these stats, and I want to allow you to talk about this. You shared something with me, Mike, which I thought made the Celtics look very good for choosing Tatum over Brown as the future face of their franchise. Mike, can you educate our audience on the shocking stats of when Jaylen Brown was not on the court for the Celtics this past season, and also the shocking stats of how much better Tatum's plus minus and all around team impact on the Celtics was than Jaylen Brown?
Yeah, thank you, Will. Thank you, Cam. Again, it's just a pleasure to be on here, the Everything Podcast. It's 2 great and amazing hosts such as yourselves. I agree with many of the things that you're saying, particularly when, Cam, you led with the kind of stages of grief, right, that everyone went to all throughout the process until the trade was announced. People who know me would say, this is not how Brad Stevens operates. This is not how he does business. Usually you don't even know a deal's going down. So the things were unusual from the very beginning. And I've always been like, I need to wait and see. I need to wait and see, because in the beginning, because it was actually, Will, you broke the news to me about when the trade happened that they were getting Paul George, I almost just couldn't believe my ears. Now, 4 first-round picks had been attached to that, I would have been, okay, at least whatever, but still going to, a conference rival who we just lost to in the playoffs in heartbreaking fashion. That said, I am and continue to be a big supporter of Brad Stevens. Not just a supporter, but a believer. Since he joined the franchise as a coach and stepping into the front office, he has done nothing but produce winning product. and in a way where he's kind of above the noise and very integral. That being said, I was dumbfounded by this. And as I was listening to the initial reaction to the fan base and the horror show, I'm like, there's got to be more to it. So I really started doing um, some deep dives, and it obviously the Celtics had made a decision they were moving on. That decision was made. According to Brad Stevens, they were open and had conversations with Jaylen Brown throughout that whole process. I also want to say this: love Jaylen Brown, right? His number should be retired with the Celtics. He's a Finals MVP, brought us a champion, and not just on the court, but his things in the community off the court, otherworldly. However, there weren't buyers for Jaylen Brown around the NBA at this asking price that the Celtics had. There weren't buyers at 2 first-round picks. There weren't buyers at 3 first-round picks. They found out through this process in a sobering fashion that the way the rest of the NBA thought of Jaylen Brown is not how the Boston Celtics thought of Jaylen Brown. And Stevens will say that analytics played a small part in the decision-making process, but if you start digging things apart, and as I shared to you both off air at different points, over the last 3 seasons when Jaylen Brown hasn't played, the Celtics record is 36-6. Also, as they were moving into things, remember, he signed his original contract before the new collective bargaining agreement with its strict penalties on people going over the first and second apron. If they went over the second apron right now, they would be handcuffed. Handcuffed. So, although they said it wasn't necessary to get out from under the contract, they said it was about giving them greater flexibility down the line. The Celtics were not going to be extending Jaylen Brown. That became clear to me through this process. So this isn't just a 3-year deal we're talking about, the 3 years he has remaining on his contract, but the 2 extension years. You're talking 5 years because everybody's saying, no, it's the same, Paul George, for Jaylen Brown. Paul George has 2, Jaylen Brown has 3. No, Jaylen Brown would have wanted an extension. It would have been 5. If he didn't get it, they were going to have problems on their hands. They're under Paul George for next year. George has player option the next year. If he picks up the player option, the Celtics can use that as a trade chip. A lot of flexibility happening there. Um, I really don't want to go down this road of really piling on Jaylen Brown because there's so much that I admire and respect about him as an athlete. Obviously, All NBA, All-Star year, sixth in the balloting for MVP. However, his plus minus for this past season, the Celtics performed better with him on the bench than they did on the court. He averaged more turnovers than assists during the playoffs, and his usage rate is so high, how much he's dominating the ball, that it's taking away from, you can argue, the productivity of other players. And to have 2 players with a high usage rate right now is not going to allow their younger players to emerge and grow. I think they have a lot of faith in Derek White. He is an analytics darling, right? Some people think that he's one of the top 10 players in the NBA. I kid you not. That has been said. One coach said he was top 5. Derek White, top 5, second in the runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year. I think they believe that Peyton Pritchard has an ability to make a jump, not to the heights necessarily of Jalen Brunson, but I have heard that mentioned. I think the biggest piece right now is that they just didn't see themselves positioned to have 2 1A stars on their team at supermax contracts. I could go on, but the 36-6 record over the past 3 seasons was the most telling to me. Also, Brad Stevens mentioned in his press conference yesterday, the Celtics didn't lead the playoffs strong in the last 2 seasons. They actually looked weak and they looked overmatched, and they didn't look like they had the right personnel on the floor to address the issues. The year that they won the championship with Brown and Tatum, they had Drew Holiday, they had a healthy Kristaps Porzingis, they had Al Horford playing in his prime. There were a lot of other pieces in there that diversified their offensive attack. So that's just a brief summary of some of my thoughts. I
Yeah,
could go on and on. There's so much to get into.
it brings a lot to the table. And I mean, it's a lot of aspects that people don't even look at. The analytics, I mean, like you said, that might not be his number one reason for trading him, but it's
I'm,
definitely
I'm
a
not so
factor.
sure. I'm not so sure about that. I think he was downplaying it. I absolutely.
Okay.
If you're looking at a player who's 36-6 over the last 3 seasons, that is sobering.
A hundred percent.
I actually dug out during the Larry Bird era, and obviously Larry Bird wasn't the same player towards the later half of his career, but the winning percentage that the Celtics had when he wasn't on the floor was like 58%. And often teams will rise up for a period of time, when a star is out, but the numbers for Jaylen were completely different.
And that's crazy to see. And so, taking that into consideration, you have Jason Tatum returning next season. This is kind of just to build a little bit of confidence next season. You got Jason Tatum returning. Will, to kind of combat your point there, I don't think Tatum will return injury prone. I mean, prior to this Achilles injury, he played in a lot of games. He was never a guy who would miss much basketball until obviously he tore his Achilles, which I mean, in all fairness, could spiral into more injuries. I don't know, but my gut tells me, and based off evidence before he got this injury, he wasn't an injury prone player. So if he continues on that streak of not being injury prone, we'll have a healthy Jason Tatum. We'll have Paul George, who has the upside of being pretty good. He's good on both ends of the ball. Granted, injury prone, but best
Let's
case,
remember though, at one time, Paul George was highly sought after player in
of
his
course.
prime, in his
I
prime,
mean,
and a two-way player. But is he that guy
100%.
anymore?
No,
No. And I think we're all like, oh my God, look at the availability for him. Excuse my language, has sucked. Really, his availability has been poor. And ever since he
yeah.
went to the Clippers, he was just never available to the extent he wanted, nor did he seem to be as dominant a player as he'd been in the past. And he's folded in the playoffs at times.
Very true. But, then you look back at the playoffs, you know where he didn't fold? Against the Celtics. He played very well. And Brad Stevens actually cited this in his explanation for um, trading Jaylen Brown, and where he says it wasn't too long ago where he saw Paul George playing very well against the Celtics. So to see his performance in that playoff series, that certainly boosts your morale going into next year. So he has the fundamentals are still there. He can be a solid player for you. He can still shoot. He can play defense. Age isn't an
He can shoot
age is an
very
issue.
well. I think he
He can
shot
shoot very well.
58% from the three-point line he shot in the playoffs.
That's incredible. And that's something I feel like that is at less of a risk of going away with injury and age. I feel like a good 3-point shot can kind of stay there. Um, but looking past Paul George, even, we're going to have Payne Pritchard, as mentioned, stepping up hopefully and taking on a bigger role, probably starting next season. Will probably be Derek White, Peyton Pritchard starting as the guards. And if he makes that jump and continues to grow as he's done every season prior, that will help the team significantly. Derek White, although granted he had a less optimal season this past season, still a solid player, still one of the highest IQ basketball players out there. I mean, you have
Best plus minus though on the Celtics. He had the
that's
best plus minus, even with having a down shooting season.
that's very impressive. And then, I mean, you got LeBron James calling Derek White one of the best players in the NBA. That counts for something. You know he has that basketball IQ. He's been around for a while. He can help guide your team. And then recently, just signing Kata to a monster deal that shows they have confidence in Kata and him growing as a player. And then on top of that, signing Mitchell Robinson, who has been solid for years with the Knicks. Granted, injury prone, most likely will come off the bench, so he'll be getting less minutes than Kata, which will hopefully leave him ready for the playoffs and in full health. And when he is healthy, he is a force. He's a big guy. He's a really solid big man, and he was for years on the Knicks. And then, granted, this is a smaller addition, but the addition of Mike Conley as a veteran presence coming off the bench, he is a leader. He is a four-time
Yeah.
sportsmanship award winner, which counts for something. I had this in my mind, possibly if they kept Jaylen Brown, um, he would sort of be a rift between Jaylen Brown and that. sort of that stuff he was saying on stream and whatever. I thought he would kind of be a leader that would promote more positivity for Jaylen Brown. That didn't end up being the case, but nonetheless, I think Mike Conley will help both in the locker room with player chemistry, and also he'll help with his veteran experience on the court. He played shockingly well at points this season and in the postseason for the Timberwolves, despite him being also another old player. I'll be interested to see what his role is for the team. I hope it's. I've always been a weirdly kind of big Mike Conley supporter since he was on the Jazz. I've just kind of been fascinated with how underrated he is, and I hope he brings some of that talent that we've seen in the past to the Celtics. And then also coming off the bench, we got Sam Hauser, who's a deadly shooter. So having him coming off the bench and taking him out of the starting lineup, I think is big. I just I don't I don't love him in the starting lineup. I don't think he's that good, and maybe he'll make a jump this season, which will be great. But I think it will be more impactful. He'll be more impactful coming off the bench. And then you have Jordan Walsh, Baylor Shireman coming off the bench as well. Two players who I expect to make huge jumps, and we could already kind of see them making jumps from the beginning to the end point of the season. Jordan Walsh specifically, I'm bought into. I've into him big. I'm interested to see what his season looks like this upcoming year. So all is not lost for the Celtics. I'm not.
What about Hugo?
Hugo, of course, yeah. I think I've heard that they were a big part of the Celtics trade for Jaylen Brown. They didn't want to trade Hugo, right?
Did not want to give up Hugo Gonzalez in the
There's a reason
Giannis
for that.
trade.
There's a reason for that. They have confidence in him, and I love that. So while my confidence isn't fully there, there are reasons to believe that we'll still be a good team next season. And as we learn more and as more offseason moves get made, I'm sure my opinion will change more and more and more. Um, I have always kind of bought into Brad Stevens. I feel like you kind of have to. I have to wait to see how the season kind of starts to say that I've bought in or whatever, bought out from Brad, but I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna say I do support Brad Stevens in this. I'm interested to see what happens, but we do have a little bit of a cushion this season. I think there is some confidence to be had going into next season. Um, Another topic that we have to address is something that I think Will is very interested in. Mike, you have your hand raised. Is there a
I did
reason?
raise my mechanical hand. I had one question. Will,
Yep.
I noticed that your co-host, Cam, in referring to the Boston Celtics, a team that's being discussed on this podcast, the Everything Podcast, as it says on the smug right here, Cam used the pronoun we.
Oh,
Do you, Will, include yourself in this we, this collective we, when we're referring to the Boston Celtics? Because I do know that you have another team that you also happen to follow. So I was just curious about that.
That's a great question. And I would say I wouldn't use the term we when it comes to the Celtics, just because I am a diehard Golden State Warriors fan. But the way I would address my feelings toward the Celtics is this. They are very much like the Celtics are like the number one team on my list, to where if they're not playing the Warriors directly, and if they're playing a different team in the regular season that's not the Warriors, I will root for the Celtics, because I think they're just such a character team with such likable players. Jason Tatum, obviously, Jaylen Brown, top of that list when he was there. And if the Warriors get bumped out of the playoffs or the play-in tournament, which has been happening quite often in recent seasons, especially since that championship in 2022, I will root for the Celtics, because they
yeah.
always seem to make deeper playoff runs than the Warriors. Because why wouldn't I want to root for them? I have a whole group of family members who love the team. They're such a likable ball club. So even if I would not use the term we, I do root for them always if they're not playing the Warriors directly.
Yeah, and well, speaking of your Warriors, you may get an upgrade or maybe a downgrade based on how you look at this. LeBron James. Well, do you think he's
Yeah.
going to the Warriors?
I genuinely, and I know this is the boring answer, but I genuinely could see LeBron James going so many places. I think there are
Really?
so many destinations that make logical sense
I feel like he's
for
knocked off of
LeBron.
a few options. I've seen that they've been him and Rich Paul have been eliminating teams on that whiteboard thing they've been doing.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, then that is definitely something to keep an eye on. But I just think there are so many teams that would make sense for LeBron to go to. Like if you think Cleveland, a homecoming, ending his career back where he started. If he goes to a team like Miami, he already has a history there. He could get the chance to compete for a title with Bam Adebayo and Giannis. The Warriors, even though I don't think they'd be winning a championship because they would be an old and injury prone team, it would be a chance for him to play with Steph, who LeBron has outwardly expressed his love for, and to be coached by Steve Kerr, who he's been coached by in the Olympics. So I know this is the boring answer, but I genuinely have no idea where LeBron is going to go because I see so many destinations that could make logical sense for him to end up in.
I see him going to the Warriors or the Cavs, to be honest. Cavs just because it would be a return home, and Warriors because, Draymond's sort of holding out on this contract here. And Rich Paul happens to be his agent. Rich Paul is LeBron's, obviously. I don't know. That seems sort of like the perfect storm. And like you said, he's expressed love for both Steph and Steve Kerr in the past. I think if he joins the Warriors, they have the potential to be a good team, a playoff team, not a finals team, but a good team nonetheless. I don't think he's going to get that last ring with the Warriors, but um, I think Warriors are the number one spot with Cavs being just below it. For me, either way, I'm interested to see where he's going to go, and I'm interested to see how impactful he'll actually be given his age, and the possible injuries that could happen at that age. Mike, you have your hand up again.
Yes, I did raise my mechanical hand. Thank you very much for acknowledging me, Cam. All right, here are the 10 teams that his agent, Rich Paul, went over on a podcast that LeBron was considering, and they put him up on the whiteboard as Cam was talking about. You guys have already mentioned the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers, but they also had the Sixers, Philadelphia, Miami Heat, the New York Knicks, the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the San Antonio Spurs, the Dallas Mavericks, and the Boston
Boston
Celtics.
Celtics. I
From
don't think he'll go to the
everything that
Celtics.
I've been reading lately, is the Warriors don't think they're in the lead for this. They're keeping their flexibility in their roster spot open. I'm being told that executives around the league, I'm hearing that Minnesota is trying to put on a strong push. Um, but I really think that right now everyone's seeing that it's the Cleveland Cavaliers
Yeah.
who are in the lead for potentially landing LeBron James. That being said, I do go back to something that Will said, and that's I have no idea. I think LeBron's going to draw this out. I think he's going to wait until see a lot of moves have been done and then make his decision from there. But one thing is for damn sure, he left Golden State without, I'm not Golden State, the Los Angeles Lakers without any tears in his eyes. That had always been a complicated relationship I think he had with their organizational structure. And those are my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we all really don't know where he's gonna go. But it is interesting to
I would
speculate.
predict, I'm predicting Cleveland.
Yeah. I think Cleveland, it's if he's going for the farewell tour, if he's going for the goodbye season, it's Cleveland. But I actually think he'd be a little bit, maybe a little bit more competitive if he signed with the Warriors. You know where I don't think he's going to sign the Celtics. He has publicly criticized the Celtics and Boston overall a lot for a couple of times. I mean, I'm actually surprised we haven't been eliminated from his consideration yet. And I also don't want LeBron's
He's
son on the
tight with
team.
Tatum. Tatum and
Oh, is that the
LeBron
reason? I
are
bet he'd love to be
closer.
coached by Missoula too.
And I think he has said high things about Missoula. I think he said high things about Stevens in the past, But yes, I'm sure he has a complicated relationship with the city of Boston just as a rival for so long.
Yeah, I've heard him talk about that. I don't want him on the team. I don't. What purpose would that serve? I don't think it would make us that much better. He would probably get injured. He probably wouldn't play a lot of the games. It would almost be a distraction, I think, for us. But it would be fun to watch. No matter where he goes, it'll be fun to watch. But with that, that wraps up this episode of the Everything Podcast. Mike, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure being here with both of you guys on the Everything podcast.
All right. And Will, thank you for joining me as always. Glad we got to talk about this, and we'll see you next time.